Principles of leadership. Increased inclusion and diversity through transformational leadership, ethics of care, and Indigenous leadership. Final project for EDUC 5401 by Danny Collins on August 3rd, 2019. The theme I wanted to talk about today is about diversity and inclusion in leadership, but actually one of the emerging themes that I noticed in all of the transformational leadership, ethics of care leadership, and Indigenous leadership resources and materials that I read, they all sort of had the same principles. So today I want to talk about some of those similarities and some of those principles. I'm going to talk about how the early theories of leadership are no longer effective today, transformational leadership, why we should focus on well-being, Notting's ethics of care and leadership, Indigenous leadership, distributed leadership opportunities, aha moments, and my personal leadership action plan. The reason why this topic is so important to me is that I believe in caring relationships and building a culture of connectivity and kindness in the workplace. And all of these transformational, Indigenous, and ethics of care leadership styles really appeal to me. So I thought that I would explore a little further today. You cannot talk about leadership without first defining what it is. For this presentation, I would like to start with Leathwood's definition. Leadership is all about organizational improvement. More specifically, it is all about establishing widely agreed upon and worthwhile directions for the organization and doing whatever it takes to prod and support people to move in those directions. Earlier in the course, we discussed several earlier styles of leadership that developed as a result of increased industrialization and incorporated the ideologies of the Enlightenment that were decidedly empirical, objective, and focused on managing workers in a competitive capitalist urban society. With rapid advances in technology, we are now challenged with globalization and increased economic inequalities. Globalization equals worldwide networking and exchange are reshaping our social, economic, and cultural life. We are now moving away from scientific management theory, widespread after the Industrial Revolution, and towards a more democratic and transformational leadership style. Millennials, in addition, are looking for more meaningful and responsible leadership in organizations that respond to our global challenges for environmental sustainability, an aging population, and increased awareness of inequalities, abuse, and exclusions. #MeToo. Educational reform in general within higher education is seeking more complex and ideological-driven reforms to deal with issues of globalization, increased diversity of students and the workforce, and increased de-evolution of financial and managerial government. Organizations in general are looking for leadership that incorporates more diverse and inclusive models to increase access to and retention of all students or employees. In opposition to earlier leadership theories, research in education has shown that there's no style of leadership or practice of leadership to be learned and applied regardless of culture or context, although leadership skills can be nurtured. Educational leadership should include the efforts of many, not only one leader, or no great man theory. Leadership is not static. The culture and vision of the organization is always changing and being co-constructed by everyone. Leaders should be flexible in response to new circumstances and people, similar to situational leadership theory. So what exactly is transformational leadership? Well, to me, it's It's a more inclusive model of leadership. It's where leaders inspire employees, they encourage employees, to be innovative and creative, and the motivation for employees is not transactional or external, it's more intrinsic, internal. Employees are motivated and having increased agency to innovate and create change that will help to positively develop and grow the organization. In 1985, Bernard Bass, an industrial psychologist, identified 4 basic elements of transformational leadership. 1 is idealized influence of leaders. 2, inspirational motivation and ability to inspire confidence. 3, intellectual stimulation and creativity. And 4, individualized consideration of group members. So why should we focus on well-being, caring, inclusion, and diversity? Well, we can look to Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Scotland, to tell us why. In the TED Summit 2019 in July, Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Scotland, described the importance of government to start looking at wellness as a viable and healthy alternative to the competitive economic strategies that we've used before and that no longer work in our current climate of environmental, political, and economic upheaval. Success should be measured, she thinks, but not by economics alone, or GDP, but by the happiness of its people. She states that how we choose to measure a country, in our case an organization's success, matters because it drives focus and action. Last year, Scotland established a new network called the Wellbeing Economy Governments Group, bringing together as founding members the countries of Scotland, Iceland, and New Zealand. They have succeeded in increasing happiness in addition to economic growth and equality for its people. It's interesting to note this quote from Dewey in 1907. The modification going on in the method and curriculum of education is as much a product of the changed social situation and as much an effort to meet the needs of the new society that is forming as our changes in modes of industry and commerce. The same could be said today. Notting's Ethics of Care is a feminist and social constructivist ideology of school reform stemming from Carol Gilligan's care ethics. The need to be cared for and feeling as though one belongs is universal, according to Notting's. This type of leadership is relational and moral. It's more inclusive and democratic. It's dialogical and socially constructed meanings. The focus is on responsibilities to self, to others, to our environment, and sustainability, a culture of kindness, respect, and, care. Another quote from Bergman is that he says, authentic human liberation and social justice can only be achieved by caring people in caring communities. Nottings also said, care ethics emphasize the mutual development and well-being of the cared for, one caring, and the relationship itself through our practices. To illustrate further Notting's ethics of care in leadership, I thought that I would show you this awesome diagram from Nicholson and Carrux. This model shows that you have dialogue, modeling, confirmation, and practice, which I believe transfers very well over into organizational leadership as well. I think that there has to be space for dialogue. I think that leaders have to model the kind of culture and be.
I think that we all are connected, just like nature. When we focus on nature altogether, instead of looking at nature as a commodity, we can do great things. I think the same is true with people. If we all focus on positive things, then we can all do great things. And we're all connected through nature. We are nature. So it's important to acknowledge people and the strengths that they bring to the table.
In an effort to be more inclusive, retain and promote the success of Indigenous students in response to the TRC calls to action, Canadian educational institutions are committed to indigenizing the institution. The efforts to indigenize are actually more inclusive of all diverse marginalized groups and are beneficial for many of us. The leadership in Indigenous cultures is intergenerational and is distributed among all members of the community. All members of the community can learn from all other members. The Indigenous leadership also deconstructs colonialist perspectives, policies, and structures that do not honor and respect cultural and personal identity. Some of the words that come up when you think of or read about Indigenous leadership are inclusion, trust, reciprocity, respect, relationships, connectivity, nature, emergent, fluid, and elders and storytelling. In fact, the oral tradition of storytelling and dialogic decision making in Indigenous culture is actually similar to Notting's ethics of care, and experiential learning is also similar to Notting's ethics of care. Experiential learning can be transferred over to organizations in that we want to encourage a culture of learning and trust and risk-taking. One of the most important things for me in the Indigenous leadership reading that I did is that one cannot take on another's burdens. Each of us has our own path and journey that we must go on. We must honor that our journeys may be different. Cheryl Sebastian, in one of our resources in the course, actually stated something similar when she said that learners and leaders must start where they're at themselves. So we must actually look at ourselves critically and think about where we are in terms of who we are, and then start from there when we're thinking about indigenizing. And I think the same is true with leadership in general. A common aspect of transformative leadership, ethics of care, and Indigenous leadership is encouraging distributed and emerging leadership in others. Some strategies I might incorporate or use to incorporate distributed leadership would include developing professional learning communities, allowing time and space during the work week, for these to develop and to follow some pet projects, and further professional development, and share resources with each other, share articles, share new strategies for doing tasks. One of the aha moments during this course is when I realized that although I have good relationships with my staff, I have not yet gained their entire trust. There is a tension in the department's roles for editing and copyright, and that we are passionate about the success of students and the work that we do in curriculum development to aid in that success. However, there are policies and hierarchical structures in place that constrain any agency we might feel we should have in relation to improving the product that we help develop. We are not curriculum specialists, subject matter experts, faculty, or administration, and therefore we are not always recognized for the work that we do. Also, like many other areas at TRU, many departments in open learning do not fully understand where and how their work may affect other departments and ultimately the success of students. Further, the earlier case study around time management that I talked about in the course made me realize that although I tend to acknowledge and respect the personal lives and challenges of staff affecting their ability to be at work, I was not actually doing my staff any favors by not focusing on the importance of the work that they do. As the work is not always the same and the final sign-off on content is not ours, we have not really been held accountable for our time management work and the scope of work required, and the scope of work required was determined elsewhere, mostly from above. This reinforced their idea that their work was not respected or important to the organization and the success of students. I have since committed to working with staff to ensure that we collaboratively find ways to get the work done and that it is completed up to the collectively agreed upon standards. My personal action plan would include the following. I want to commit to ongoing critical reflection and research of leadership action efficacy in education. I also want to continue to provide opportunities for staff to develop and promote professional learning communities. I will increase my efforts to build relationships and trust. I always have an open door policy, but I will honor that a little bit more
good
and
leadership
promote
is
that a
about
bit more.
connections and
I'm going
relationships.
to
I
celebrate
think that some of my
individual and
strengths as a
collective
leader is
successes
that
in my
I am all
department
about
and make
relationships.
sure
I
that
believe in empowering
those things
people
are being
and giving
communicated
them
to other
agency.
departments.
One of the
I
other
want to
strengths that I
ensure
think I
that
have
direct
is being a
communication will
role
happen,
model
even though
and
sometimes
enacting the
that's
kind of
not always
culture
encouraged
and
in the
behavior that
hierarchical
I would
communication
like to see
system
in
in our
our
institution.
culture
But
and
I hope
environment.
that with personal relationships and introductions that I can change that. I also want to increase the profile of our departments and recognize and, like I said, celebrate our successes. I also want to increase my self-care and make sure that I take care of myself. Like I said in the Indigenous leadership portion, I recognize that I can't take on other people's problems and I can go on that journey with them, but I can't always steer the boat. And increased and continued effort to co-create a safe culture in the workplace, inclusive of all. Lately, I've been trying to create a open learning wide team building exercise so that we can all sort of learn about what each team does and sort of get rid of some of those silos. So by now, you should understand the connections that I'm trying to make and illustrate that are emerging from the research and action around transformational leadership that TRC calls action and Indigenous leadership, and Notting's ethics of care, and where they hold similarities. All of them are moving away from competitive commodity and industry focus towards a community and collaborative culture focus. All focus on care, morality, and responsibility to ourselves, each other, and the environment. They all sort of emerge from a Western control and individual-based worldview towards an Eastern collectivity and community-based worldview. All of them promote dialogic, organic, emergent, socially constructed, relational, and critically reflective meaning making. And all of them promote self-care as an important part of the leadership practice.